Hey guys, are you ready for today's August 1st, 2018, 6:46 a.m. Central Time. So this video is going to have a ton of facts in it that you're not going to get anywhere else, guaranteed, unless somebody watches this video and rips my material off, as that has happened in the past, especially with Second Amendment issues. Big surprise. Anyway, so it may run a tiny bit long. There are two bills that came out in the Senate yesterday. I'm going to show you those bills, so be aware of them. There's nothing that has come out in the House just yet regarding this situation. I'm going to show you two articles that have two paragraphs. That's it that I'm going to show you. And I'm going to go over the actual TRO because I found the actual court document that came out of Washington or Seattle, whatnot, for the temporary restraining order against Cody, who owns the nonprofit, Defense Distributed. And I did a video 2 videos back, actually, because my last video was done in my bedroom, talking about this situation with Cody, okay, and how that all went down, and that he was able to do this now. Now, all of a sudden, since yesterday, around 4:30-ish p.m., Pacific time out there, he has been prevented from doing this now. Now, here's the deal. I'm going to go over first these two bills. The thing is, here's the deal. Another reason to be on my Patreon account. I record footage of all kinds of stuff. Committees, committee hearings, floor footage, all kinds of shit, and I put it on my Patreon account that is important. Yesterday, in the Senate, prior to the TRO happening, Democrats were freaking out. I took every single Democrat that spoke yesterday, combined it, and put it in a video and put it on my Patreon account. Something that specifically happened in that session yesterday was that Senator Nielsen from Florida, quote unquote, introduced, S-3304, a bill to amend Chapter 44 of Title 18. Title 18 is all you should know, has to do with firearms. I've been going over it for years. U.S. Code to prohibit the publication of 3D printer plans for the printing of firearms and for other purposes. The thing is, when he brought this up on the floor, he had distributed it maybe 2 hours prior. And had there not been a senator there to object to this unanimous consent request, this bill would have become law. Because unanimous consents, for most of you should know if you've been following me for a very long time, when somebody says that in the Senate floor and there is no one to object to it, it automatically goes through and passes. There's no votes. There's nobody on record for it. Happens all the fucking time. Usually about stupid subjects that actually mean nothing, that generally don't amend code, don't affect your life, especially doesn't have anything to do with your amendments. And personally, this actually has to do with your First Amendment and Second Amendment more than anything. So this would be very odd. So he did that. He, quote, introduced this by saying the title, didn't explain what it is. The text and summary is not out on it, so I don't know exactly what it says. But he said, I would like to push this unanimous consent to pass on the Senate floor. Luckily, Senator Lee chimed in and said, nope, I object. And the reason he objected was simple. He actually stated the very first line of the bill, which was something like to prohibit people from publishing or something of that nature. I can't remember exactly. If you're on my Patreon account, guess what? You get to know. And he had a First Amendment concern with it. And he also said, hey, you just gave us this. I haven't even had time to read it. So luckily, he was in the chamber when that happened. Now, after he spoke, there were several Democrats that spoke after that pushed the idea of absolutely passing a bill using unanimous consent regarding this situation. So that is something you need to watch. Now, what happened to this bill is it was, quote, introduced. It was read twice and referred to the Committee on Judiciary. The Committee on Judiciary, I watch very closely in the Senate and the House, because most interesting bills regarding firearms and national security and all kinds of stuff go through that actual committee, and it's just the most interesting committee of all. So I will watch this and see if it goes anywhere. The second one, however, a lot of you may be interested in this because it depends on what the text says. S-33008. Oh, and that one came out from Nelson. Like I said, yeah, he's from Florida. This one came out from Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. Can't stand that guy, especially can't stand his counterpart, Murphy. Anyway, S3300, a bill to amend Chapter 44 of Title 18 U.S. Code to ensure that all firearms are traceable and for other purposes. Depending on how that actually is written out, it is a high possibility that 80% lowers could possibly be required to have serial numbers on them if this were to pass. If I'm incorrect and that they all have serial numbers now, then fine. But from what I understand, I don't deal with them. The only place that requires a serial number for an 80% lower is, of course, liberal California. So that could be a problem in here. So a lot of things could be a problem in this bill. I'm really interested to see this particular bill's text. So anyway, that's what came out. So this is very quickly these two articles that came out. One came out the Daily Caller. I just pulled these up because of very specific sentences that were used. Okay, it says, quote, "It costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to acquire a printer and the files and the know-how to do this. They don't work worth a damn. Criminals can obviously go out and steal guns or even manufacture quote-unquote real guns, not 3D printed," said Larry Keene, executive director of the National Shooting Sports Foundation. He said that to the Washington Post. Now, I went over to this article, and this came from The Guardian. And, of course, Schumer actually said this. This was in the video I did on my Patreon account. So people who are on my Patreon account, this is a repeat for you. Quote, "All you need is a little money, and you can download a blueprint from the internet to make a gun at home," said the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Quote, "No background check, no criminal history check," end quote. So it's a very big gap between knowledge, of course, as usual, between actual people who deal with guns, the Second Amendment, and everything else, and build them, whatever, such as myself. I don't build 3D guns, but I do build AR-15s. Compared to what Washington, D.C. people who say, Nelson, excuse me, I keep fucking that up. Nelson actually says that he is a hunter, and he disagrees with having, quote, automatic weapons on the streets, which are semi-automatic AR-15s. And he actually used the word automatic and did not use the correct language, and actually thinks that those fuckers can take 800 to 900 rounds a minute. That's crazy. The people on Capitol Hill are nuts. They don't know shit about anything. And the problem is when they say these types of statements, people who don't know anything about firearms whatsoever, period, believe it, okay? And that's the problem we have in this society. So here's the deal. I'm going to give you all these links. I actually found this link, so I put it into a PDF, though, so I could highlight the important sections. This came out yesterday, July 31st. This was State of Washington plaintiffs versus United States Department of State defendants. So the parts that I highlighted are the most important parts. The problem is what the Trump administration didn't do when they did a settlement with Defense Distributed. I'm shocked they did not follow through with what they were supposed to do. So it kind of almost makes that settlement moot. But anyway, I'll show you that in a second. It says Defense Distributed posted CAD files for various weapons on its website in December 2012. The federal government requested that they be immediately removed from public access. What's amazing to me, yes, is that fucking Capitol Hill is always behind. This settlement happened in like June, I think. June or July, maybe early July, whatever, with Defense Distributed. This did not happen 2 or 3 days ago. They made this a huge deal yesterday and came out with bills yesterday to deal with this situation. Everything by Congress is last minute. Anyway, the government ended up using ITAR, which is, I explained all that information in my last video talking about Cody. Using ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulation. I explained what ITAR is. Cody went back and said, and fought, saying censorship of expression in the violation of the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fifth Amendments to the United States Constitution was his argument. The federal government opposed that motion, arguing, and this is important to know what they argued prior to what they are doing now. They argued export of defense distributed's CAD files could cause serious harm to U.S. national security and foreign policy interests and warrant subjects, the files, to ITAR export licensing of technical data. Number 2, defense distributed's CAD files constitute the functional equivalent of defense articles capable in the hands of anyone who possesses commercially available 3D printing equipment of, quote, automatically, end quote, generating a lethal firearm that can be easily modified to be virtually undetectable in metal detectors and other security equipment. Number 3, the State Department in particular concerned that defense distributed proposed export of undetectable firearms technology could be used in an assassination, for the manufacture of spare parts by embargo nations, terrorist groups, or guerrilla groups, or to compromise aviation security overseas in a manner specifically directed at U.S. persons, and 4, both the government and public, quote, have a strong interest in curbing violent regional conflicts elsewhere in the world, especially when such conflicts implicates the security of the United States and the world as a whole. Now I'm going to move on. It says the then director of the Office of Defense Trade Controls Management, Lisa, concluded that the unrestricted export of defense distributed's CAD files would result in the production of plastic firearms that are fully operable and virtually undetectable by conventional security measures, that their use to commit terrorism, piracy, assassinations, and other serious crimes would cause serious, long-lasting harm to foreign policy and national security interests of the United States. That efforts to restrict the ability of defense articles to enemies of the United States would fail, that the proliferation of weapons and related technologies would contribute to a more dangerous international environment, and that the export would undercut the domestic laws of nations that have more restrictive firearm controls, and the United States foreign relations with those nations would suffer. I mentioned that as being a possibility for us if they were to end up allowing defense distributed to do this, and then we make a law against it, but say Chinese have already ripped it off and the Chinese put it all over online, and then all of a sudden we get online censorship. That was something I said at the end of my video talking about Cody. Now moving on. What it says is in April 2018, the federal government moved to dismiss Defense Distributed's lawsuit, reiterating that what was at stake was, quote, the United States' ability to control the export of weapons, a system of law and regulations that seeks to ensure that articles useful for warfare or terrorism are not shipped from the United States to other countries or otherwise provided to foreigners without authorization, where beyond the reach of U.S. law, they could be used to threaten U.S. national security, U.S. foreign policy interests, or international peace and stability. Later that month, the parties reached a tentative settlement agreement, which is described in the first paragraph of this order, will allow Defense Distributed to place downloadable CAD files. This is the important part that fucking Trump administration screwed up. For automated weapons printing on its website. No findings or facts or other statements are provided in the agreement that could explain the federal government's dramatic change of position or that alter its prior analysis regarding the likely impacts of publication on the United States national security interests. And then it says, the procedure for obtaining a temporary restraining order differs from that which is applicable for a preliminary injunction context. Here's the deal. This is a TRO, temporary restraining order. In order, what they're going to do, and that's at the end of this TRO, is they're going to have a hearing. They're going to come back to court. I believe it's August 10th. I'll have to check, as it will come up at the end of this document, to actually try and get a preliminary injunction. The difference between the two is a temporary restraining order, first of all, is hard to overturn right away, but they're temporary. The most timing they can have, I think, is up to like 20 days, but I think the normal is like 10 days they're only in effect for. So you actually have to have some sort of hearing or something come up within that time frame. Otherwise, it expires. A preliminary injunction, on the other hand, is something that would be it'd be like a TRO in a sense that, okay, let me try and explain this. A preliminary injunction. Say that me and my husband are breaking up or something. This is a horrible example, but you'll get the idea. Me and my husband are breaking up. We want to sell the house, but we're arguing over, who did the down payment, blah, 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 all this trash, okay? And it needs to go to court. What they'll do is they'll do a preliminary injunction, meaning we can't sell the house, we can't do anything, period, until it goes to court and the courts deal with it. So that means it's basically permanent in a sense until the courts deal with it. So it could go on for a very long time, unlike a temporary restraining order. Then in that sense, when a preliminary injunction happens, they can turn it into a permanent injunction, which would actually cause whatever happened in the original preliminary injunction to stay forever, overturning whatever happened. Hopefully that makes sense. It says the factors in order to get a temporary restraining order are the following. 1, they are likely to succeed on the merits. 2, they are likely to suffer irreparable harm in the absence of preliminary relief. 3, the balance of equity tips in their favor. And 4, an injunction is in the public interest, in which that all came about in this whole paperwork. So this is the deal. This is where President Trump, the administration, whoever decided to do this, fucked up. The federal government represents that its settlement was the result of a multi-year review process which was completed May 2018 and resulted in a determination that the type of firearms and related technical data at issue here would not provide a military advantage to adversaries and therefore no longer warranted export control under AECA and should be removed from the USML. It says the governing statute, here's the deal, 22 U.S. Code 2778F1 requires that the result of such review be reported to Congress and precludes that the removal of any item from the USML until 30 days after such notice is given. A, President delegated his authority under AECA. He also imposed a requirement that any changes in designations of defense articles and defense services subject to export control had to have the concurrence of the Secretary of Defense, meaning General Mattis. And here's the deal. That's number 2. There is no indication that the federal government followed the prescribed procedures. So the Trump administration didn't even do what they were supposed to when they dealt with Cody and made that settlement with Defense Distributed. And if I were Cody and Defense Distributed, I would somehow, I have no idea what the actual case would be, but I would somehow sue the hell out of the Trump administration for not doing their job. But beside the point. So moving on. This is actually the end of this document. This is what was written by Robert, who is a U.S. District Judge. And it says, for all of the foregoing reasons, plaintiffs' motions for temporary restraining order is granted. The federal government, defendants, and all of their respective officers, agents, and employees are hereby enjoined from implementing or enforcing the temporary modification of Category 1 of the United States Munition List and the letter to Cody R. Wilson, Defense Distributed, and Second Amendment Foundation, who was part of that, issued by the U.S. Department of State on July 27th, 2018, and shall preserve the status quo as if the modification had not occurred and the letter had not been issued. Pursuant to the limitations set forth in the Fed R. Civ. P65, this matter is hereby set for a hearing Friday, August 10th, 2018 at 9 a.m. to determine whether the temporary restraining order should be converted to a preliminary injunction. No bond shall be required. Poof! That's the end of this TRO. So that's what's going to end up happening there. So August 10th, this is when this is going to go down again to see if it's going to turn into a preliminary injunction. And then at that point, depending on how that goes down, this could go on for months and months and months, going into a permanent injunction or whatever the hell it is. And God knows what will happen between now and then in Congress, because depending on how the midterms go, I do not believe by any means that the Senate will go to the Democrats, but it's possible the Senate may go to the House may go to the Democrats. I think that's actually kind of sketchy at this point. But beside the point, it'll be very difficult to pass anything through the Senate to get to Trump's desk regarding this situation. And to be honest with you, if it were to pass, bipartisan, partisan, however it works, depending on how all the outcome works in the midterms, I think Trump would sign it. Anyway, this is Are You Ready For It? Take care, guys. Have a great morning.